When you need mealtime inspiration, it's worth shopping Kroger for thousands of appetizing ingredients that inspire countless mouthwatering meals. And no matter what tasty choice you make, you'll enjoy our everyday low prices. Plus, extra ways to save, like digital coupons worth over $600 each week and up to $1 off per gallon at the pump with points. So you can get big flavors and big savings. Kroger, fresh for everyone. Fuel restrictions apply.
Every gift has a shadow, and every shadow has a gift. This has been one of my biggest lessons through my spiritual growth. I've learned that the impact of our actions or words can vary dramatically based on the energy that we bring to them. Take serving others, for instance. This can come from a sense of purpose and self-worth, or it can be rooted in people-pleasing. Same action, totally different vibe. Similarly, there's a fine line between genuinely helping someone and trying to fix them. They might even look identical on the surface, but their essence and their outcomes can be worlds apart. This duality is everywhere in our lives. Confidence can be empowering or arrogant, depending on how you use it. Ambition can drive you to reach for the stars or have you stepping on others to get there. Even love, that beautiful heart-expanding feeling, can turn into a cage when fear creeps in. It can go from I love you to I own you real quick if we're not careful. Here's the thing. We are wired for black and white thinking. Good or bad, right or wrong. But life isn't that simple, is it? Everything has layers, like the world's most complicated onion. And this all or nothing mindset is why so many of us struggle to speak up. We've been fed this story that good girls sit down, shut up, and go with the flow. It's a survival tactic, sure, but at what cost? On the flip side, some of us learned that speaking up was the only way to survive. So we ended up shouting our truth from the rooftops, leaving no room for anyone else's reality. Been there, done that. And it's usually the stage right after a big drastic change, like becoming vegan, and then again when going back to meat. But here's what I'm wondering. Is there a middle ground? A way to honor our truth while leaving space for others? I think there is. It's about finding that sweet spot between doormat and bulldozer. It's speaking your mind without steamrolling others. It's setting boundaries with kindness. It's disagreeing without dismissing. Is it easy? Hell no, but it's worth it. Because when we embrace the messy middle, we open ourselves up to richer relationships and a deeper understanding of ourselves. And if you're thinking it's woo-woo, stick with me because research in psychology and neuroscience backs this up. Our brains are literally wired for nuance and complexity. We just need to flex those muscles. So that's what we're talking about today, how to speak up from your soul rather than your ego. Our guest is Amy Green Smith. She's a life coach and hypnotherapist, speaker, and communication expert. She helps people find their voice and move to a place of radical personal empowerment and self-worth. 3 key things we will learn are how to master the art of setting boundaries without drama, why people emotionally regress and how to handle it with empathy, and how specificity in conversation just might save your relationships. Before we go deep today, I want to give you a little gift, and I want to give it to you every single day. It's called the Morning Mind Love. I know how life can be. You're all fired up after an inspiring episode, and then a new day or a new challenge comes at you, and it's just hard to keep up that energy. Well, the Morning Mind Love is kind of like an oracle from your higher self to help you start each day with a positive focus. Plus, when you sign up, you get 2 free gifts, a 30-minute binaural meditation and 30 days of journaling prompts to help you remember who you truly are. And it's all completely free. So join over 9,000 people and go to mindlove.com to sign up or text the word morning to 33777.
I think having these phrases on point helps us not go into our old pattern of behavior because we're creatures of habit, right? So if we're used to people pleasing or shutting up, being quiet, or conversely, fighting and litigating our case, then we will naturally call upon those defenses. They're actually quite malleable if you know much about neurology, like the neuroscience of how the neural pathways work in the brain and how you can actually change those pathways in the brain. You don't always have to behave that way around your mom, or you don't always have to fly off the handle. You don't always have to people please or turn to perfectionism, but you've got to have some sort of pattern interrupt.
Turn up your frequency with Mind Love. Bite-sized brain hacks for seekers, dreamers, and doers. It's time to give your mind a little love with your host, Melissa Monti.
So what inspired your recent deep dive into the art of speaking up?
Wow. Well, I think like most folks who find themselves in somewhat of the online expert space, they have gone through their own set of trials and tribulations in order to kind of learn their lessons the hard way. And my situation was very, very similar. So for a bit of context, I grew up in an extremely conservative, born again Christian family. My father had a master's in divinity and a doctorate in ministry. So not fucking around over there. And, for all intents and purposes, I was the good kid, right? My two younger siblings did jail time and had trouble with drugs and, sort of the quintessential older child compared to the younger kids. And, I started working when I was 14 and put myself through college, got married, moved out really young, and was quite self-sustaining. And in '07, everything kind of came to a head for me with my family of origin when my father passed. And because I was working as a makeup artist at the time, I felt very convicted that I was going to do his makeup for his viewing. So yes, everyone, this is dead dad makeup talk right now. Is what we're talking about. And I also spoke. I gave his eulogy to crowds of hundreds of people. So I'm feeling like I'm winning at daughter that day, right? My two other siblings weren't nearly as involved in the process and were handling their grief in their own way. So I'm feeling like a bad bitch, like I'm really showing up for my dad. I get back home to my mom's house and she finds it the most opportune time to tell me that she feels that my father and her had failed as parents because the three of us grouping me in with my derelict siblings, they're not that way anymore. But at the time, because the three of you are not, quote, walking with the Lord. And because I was not subscribed any longer to the faith traditions that I was raised with, it was as though anything else that made me who I was or my character or how I showed up in this world was kind of null and void. And also grouped in as a triplet when I had my own identity. And I think really the only thing I could kind of muster in that moment was to say, I don't think you should say that to a child, And she said, well, that's just how I feel. And I'll tell you what, Melissa, up until that point, I was a fantastic shapeshifter. I had a veneer, I had an artifice. Every time my partner and I would go home to my parents' house, I would brief him and I would say, okay, no Jon Stewart, no liberal agenda, no cussing, no alcohol, no South Park. And so I had really gotten attuned to not necessarily showing up as though I was this pious religious person, but I didn't object. I didn't say, hey, I don't share that opinion or actually find that really offensive. I just kind of stayed quiet. And that was the moment when I had to figure out, okay, are we going to keep staying silent? And I think I was also quite bolstered by my grief and the volume of pain that I was sustaining at the time. And it was sort of like the dam burst. And I don't think that speaking up for yourself, establishing boundaries, having tough conversations are always an ultimatum. In fact, I think many times they're not. However, if push comes to shove and I have to decide between making someone else happy or making me happy, I'm going to choose me. And that was the day that really shifted for me. But I'll tell you what, it was a shit show after that. It was not beautiful. It was not articulate. I became incredibly combative and adversarial, and I wanted to fight about all of this stuff that I hadn't given voice to for so long. And then it wasn't until sort of taking my foot out of my mouth many times and actually apologizing for my delivery, not my stance, not my opinion, but how I expressed that opinion or stance. That's when I realized, oh, you can actually speak up for yourself with the utmost grace and kindness. You can ask adult children to move out of the house with love and compassion. You can ask for a divorce without being acerbic and biting. And that shifted everything for me in my work. So up until that time, I was kind of segueing from makeup artistry into personal growth and coaching modality. And it took me a minute to really get, and when I say a minute, like a solid decade, to really get my footing in genuinely believing that I'm worthy and that my voice matters, period. My happiness matters. And B, did I say A or B? I can't remember if I said one or two. That's a perimenopause brain. And B, that it was actually possible to be vocal without being an asshole. We kind of get this narrative that if you speak up for yourself, you're being shrill or you're being a bitch or you're being domineering. And I really think that's quite the fallacy. So that has been a major part of my own journey, but then informs the work that I do now.
Oh, we have so much in common.
Yay, I love that. That
Except,
happens a lot.
yeah, none of my parents had a master's in divinity, but my mom would have been like, I wish we could spend Christmas with Amy's family. She was always looking at the higher ups in the church and just really fantasizing about their Christmases. We heard that every year. But
That's hilarious.
I totally relate in the entire arch of that story. And it makes me wonder, well, my beliefs now, it's funny, I zoom out and I'm like, oh, what a loving mother that she's willing to embody that adversary so that you could finally learn to speak up for yourself at
That's right.
such a sensitive time.
Yeah.
And I was recently speaking to one of my friends, and I still get in these conversations, and I still find myself, it's like my inner child is still trying to get its voice through these interactions. And that's a blessing and a curse because on one hand, at least she's getting her voice. On the other hand, for some reason, because of that relationship, the dynamics of that relationship, I feel like I sink to a lower level and I don't communicate as fluidly as I'm able to with other people. And I was recently talking to one of my friends after one of these tiffs and I was just venting and she's like, well, what is like the bigger issue here? Like, what is really so bothersome about this? And I started thinking about it, and it's like, okay, we're not going to change each other's minds. A part of me feels unseen by the person that I want to see me the most. And it's not even just that, it's like, it's a form of rejection because what I believe is who I'm becoming and how I see the world. And it's, how they think. And so it's just like an immediate shutdown, like, oh, yeah, poor Melissa, she's wrong. And it's like, why, what is so bothersome about feeling wrong in that moment, first of all? But then I think even the deeper root is in the conversations, because sometimes it's difficult to show up as my higher self. It's like I'm triggered and all of a sudden the 8-year-old version of me is there. It makes me feel like a fraud. Like all my growth has gone out the window in just that one moment. And so then I hang up the phone or I go home or whatever the situation is. And it just feels like I'm ripped open. I'm left vulnerable in the worst position, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. And I think what you're pointing to, first of all, there's a name for that. What you're experiencing, we oftentimes will call it emotional regression. And it's where you kind of embody the age that you were when you suffered the most acute trauma related to what you're discussing. So for me, most of the time, I come out as sort of like this 17, 18-year-old version of myself who had such a strong intuition, but felt like I was wrong and bad and sinful and going to hell and could not quite reconcile my life experience with what I had been told. So I think, first of all, knowing that that's an incredibly human way to behave, that we are wired for connection. You don't have to go much further than Maslow's hierarchy of needs to see that one of our primitive human needs is one of belonging. And I know you've talked about this with various guests in the past, but that's because we had to belong to a group in order to survive. So we do the exact same thing with our workplaces, with our friends, with our families of origin, where we go, if I'm not accepted, if I'm not approved of, I might die. Now, we don't consciously think that, but that's what's motivating us on that subconscious level. And our subconscious mind, depending on who you talk to, is roughly 95% of our mind's power. So that's really running the ship. So no matter how much logically in your conscious mind you think, I know I shouldn't let her get to me. I am solid in my own spiritual path. I believe in the work that I'm doing in the world. You can do that all damn day. But if there's disconnect in the subconscious mind that says, approval from my mom is mandatory, or from my family of origin, that's safe. Or let's say, like in my situation, I learned that certain behaviors like people pleasing, acquiescing, perfectionism, overachievement, then perhaps I can garner the love and the acceptance that I need. But all of that is very much rooted in us genuinely trying to caretake for ourselves. And the other piece too that I think we cannot escape is that I don't think we ever stop rooting for our parents to come through for us. I don't think we ever stop desiring to have that approval or that love. What I do think we have to reckon with is that we may never get that. And sometimes there's various reactions to that. Sometimes it's an extreme amount of grief and sadness. And then in other situations, which perhaps this is what's happening for you, we keep giving them chances. We keep trying to show up in a way for them to meet our needs, and they keep RSVPing no, but we keep inviting and we keep inviting and we keep inviting, which is why I will often say, speak your truth into ears that can hear you. And I don't mean only speak up with people who are on your side, but I mean, when you are fragile about something, where your spirituality is growing, or you just started a new business, or you're thinking about dating again, and that person is not a safe place to land, don't keep bidding for that approval, right? Be selective about what you share in those situations. But I also think it's incredibly important to know and honor that we're wired that way. There's not something uniquely broken or weird that you keep knocking on that door and getting it slammed in your face. It's a part of us saying like, wait, I thought you were my tribe. I thought you were my group. And oh, I guess I'm not. I guess I'm not safe. And there's a lot of grief involved with that.
I just experienced a visceral reaction when you said that. I don't know why it took me so long to invest in good bedding. I resisted it for years, but something flipped in me about 3 years ago. And now I'm basically a pillow connoisseur. I've tried them all, and I get weirdly excited about good bedding. Because here's the thing, we spend a third of our lives in bed, and the quality of that time affects literally everything else, which is why I'm so excited to tell you about my latest obsession, Lagoon Sleep Pillows. What sets them apart is their matching system. You take a quick 2-minute quiz about your sleep style and your preferences, and then they match you with your perfect pillow. I was matched with their Otter pillow, and I am so impressed. Lately, I've just needed more support, and this seems to cradle me in all the right places. I'm also low-key obsessed with their travel pillow, which I use for way more than just travel. I actually hug it, use it as leg support, and of course, take it on trips with me. Well, the secret is in their adjustable fill. You can add or remove it to get that perfect alignment for your spine. A study even found that the right supportive pillow can improve sleep quality by 63%. And Lagoon lets you try their matched pillow for 100 nights risk-free. Free returns, no questions asked. Falling asleep has never been easier. I toss and turn less and just wake up feeling refreshed every morning. Go to lagoonsleep.com and take their awesome 2-minute sleep quiz to find your match. Use the code MIND for 15% off your first purchase. You know what's funny? We spend so much time feeding our minds, reading books, listening to podcasts, learning new things, but then we grab whatever's convenient to feed our bodies. And I get it. Life is busy, and sometimes a drive-through feels like the only option. But that's why I take Field of Greens. It's a greens powder made with whole organic fruits and vegetables. No extracts, no lab-made stuff, and just 1 scoop a day gives you simple, real nutrition. Field of Greens feeds your body with fruits and vegetables medically chosen to support your heart, vital organs, and immune system. And let me tell you something. Since I started taking it, I've noticed these little changes that show me how nutrient depleted I must have been before. Like the ridges in my nails, gone. My sleep, so much better. And my stomach just feels happy. You know that dreaded afternoon crash that has you reaching for more coffee or sugary snacks? Well, that's not happening for me anymore. When your body is actually nourished, it runs so much better. I've tried other greens powders before, but Field of Greens is genuinely different. The quality is next level and you can taste it. It's become my go-to, especially on those days when my eating isn't exactly Instagram worthy, because we all have those days, right? And here's the thing. They are so confident that you'll love it too, that they offer a 100% money-back guarantee. That's how much they believe in their product. So I got you 15% off your first order and free rush shipping. Visit fieldofgreens.com and use promo code MINDLOVE. That's promo code MINDLOVE at fieldofgreens.com. fieldofgreens.com. I just experienced a visceral reaction when you said that. And one thing that comes up for me a lot that I've brought up time and again on this podcast is just one of the things I feel like my soul came here to work on is that loneliness and belonging. I was an only child. We moved a lot when I was a kid, even though my mom won't acknowledge that we did. I'm like, can I count my elementary schools for you? Like, what do you mean we didn't move a lot? Really confusing to me. But anyways, I don't have siblings to bounce off with. Whereas my husband and I have talked about this. He had a lot of siblings. And there's something to be said about another person who is having a very similar life experience as you, where you can look at each other and say, Mom and Dad are crazy. Whether or not they're actually crazy, but it's just maybe the 12-year-old self versus the 30-something-year-old group. You experience each other as a little nuts. And so I never had that. And so for me, it was always, I must be wrong. I need to integrate this as absolute reality. They're the adults. And so I had the same nudges of, I don't really fit with this. And so I spent a lot of my early 20s feeling that it was like this borderline of rejecting God and having a subconscious awareness that this might just be me rebelling. This might just be me angry at God. But their reality was still absolute reality. And so in a vulnerable moment, I would be really trying to understand how that was true. And so now I spent a lot of years understanding biblical history, how the Bible has changed over time, what other religions have said. I needed to do like a deep excavation of religious history to really figure out what my truth was, because I needed proof on my side. Whereas I feel like another version of me that if I would have grown up in a different situation, maybe I would have just been able to find it with a little more ease. But instead I had to create my armor. I had to build a case for my beliefs, which again has been another blessing and a curse. I think that has brought a lot to what I'm here to deliver to the world. And also it's created a lot of pain and internal conflict. And so it's just interesting now how I still feel the need to do that. And it's funny because I'll still have that emotional regression in conversations. But now I'm at a place where I feel like I want to find that middle ground. Like, okay, well, what do we agree on? We agree that there is a higher power. We agree that Jesus was a beautiful human. We might disagree a little bit on, or a lot of it on his exact role in the world, although I can still frame his role in a way. And so I've found these like coming to the middle things. But then I wonder, am I doing myself a service or disservice? Am I doing the relationship a service or disservice? Because then it feels like I open the door to, for example, just this week, I got an email. I really hope you'll watch all of these episodes. I think you'll really resonate. I don't even know what it was, but it was a 6-episode series that also had Bible study underneath it. And I'm just like, I'm not open for this. Like, and so
Right.
it's like, I wish we could meet in the middle and also have the opening to, can you meet in the middle too? But no, it's like, oh, Melissa's opened the door. Now I can
Witness.
rush in with all this.
Yeah, I have a similar situation where I had shared with my parents ages ago that I was really questioning a lot of things. So of course they buy me a book called Can a Smart Person Believe in God, which is totally a Christian book. And I I didn't say this at the time, but I was like, "Oh no, I'm clear I don't believe what you believe." That's already clear. But I'm just exploring other areas. And I too felt that conviction of I need to have a counter offer. I need to have something that I can say, I'm this now. This is what I believe. And I thought I had to subscribe to something. So I looked at universal Unitarianism and some different spiritual faiths that I felt like I could get on board with. And it honestly wasn't until probably 4 or 5 years ago that I was even introduced to the word deconstruction. And, I had essentially deconstructed from my faith 27 years ago. And what's curious about that is there are all these ways to excuse your behavior. So they will oftentimes say that eliminates the place of responsibility or fallibility on their behalf. So they'll say things like, oh, you just want to sin. You just want to live in sin. And I'm like, well, what if I just don't believe that sin exists? Then everything changes. It's like, oh, your heathen ways. It's like, well, no, I just don't believe that that's a thing. So I think one thing that has been really helpful for me is to give everybody the same type of respect that I want in return. So years ago, I had a conversation with my mom where she would routinely invite me to church. She would routinely invite me to these different events or give me gifts that were Christian in nature. And so I said to her one time, hey, listen, that this has to be really difficult for you that all 3 of your children opted to not follow something that you would literally lay your life down for. And we opted out of that. I can't imagine how difficult that must be for you. And I also am not opting for this way of life out of spite or out of hurt towards you. And the same way I don't ask you if you're celebrating summer solstice or talk to you about your astrological sign or tell you what's coming in from the spirit guides. I don't do that because I know that's severely offensive to you. So I would like the same in return. And here's what I will promise you. If I ever change my mind, you will be the absolute first person to know. But going forward, what I would humbly request is that you refrain from inviting me to various functions. And I just gave her sort of a list of like, please don't gift me anything. It will immediately be tossed. And I would hate to do that, right? Like, so I just gave her all of these specifics because when you are communicating with somebody, if you say something like, I just need you to respect my spirituality more, it's like, well, what the fuck does that mean? If you go to your partner and say, I need more romance, he's like, sweet, she wants me to initiate sex more. And you're like, no, I wanted you to leave notes around the house, or I wanted you to plan date nights, right? We have to be specific. So when we are sharing a boundary, or delivering a boundary, I think it's important to, first of all, speak in a cadence and in a rhythm where you can actually be heard, right? So if you're yelling and screaming and standing on your throne of righteousness about, I'm going to prove you wrong, then now basically what we're doing is litigating. We're just litigating against one another. We're not really seeing each other's humanity or how devastating. We've had conversations where I've said, it saddens me so much that you have such limited resources or such a limited framework that there's only one right way. And I don't subscribe to that. I think that there are so many different right spiritual paths and ways to experience, quote, God or universe or consciousness or whatever you would ascribe to that. And that saddens me because I feel like you're so limited with that. However, I respect that that's yours. And she's like, yeah, you're right. She's like, you're right. I only believe there's one right way. And I'm like, cool. That's also not going to work for me. So, and what that looks like practically is that we're relegated to kind of only speaking about superfluous things. We talk about food prep or home decor or plants because the work that I do is somewhat of the devil for her. I don't believe the devil exists. And the work that she does, I think, is unbelievably abusive, where they will stand outside of mosques or other types of spiritual centers and try to convert people. I find that abusive and disrespectful. So I cannot support her work the same way she cannot support mine. So what that means, and this is something that through working with a religious trauma therapist, I was able to really see, like, he said how cool that it's not a deal breaker for her, that she still very much wants to be in your life. She still really wants you to be around. And I had never really thought about it like that. And I went, okay, cool. It's not a deal breaker for me either, as long as I have these various boundaries in place. When we're at my house, we do not pray. That's not, you're more than welcome to bow your head. But if I'm in your home, I will hold your hands and pretend I'm at a seance. But no, I will be respectful the same way I want to be respectful. But I will absolutely say I don't share that opinion. And something that I have done considerably more in the last year and a half is just to take up damn spiritual space. So what I have found from a majority of Christian folks that I surround myself with is that they have no problem taking up spiritual space, no problem saying God really laid it on my heart, or I'm just really lifting it up, or God spoke to me in this way. And great that you can do that, but also I'm going to also be saying, I got a really great message from the spirit guides. I've been getting just a bevy of different angel numbers everywhere I turn. So I know that I'm on the right, like, I'm also going to say those sorts of things. I'm not going to deliberately try to cause malice or harm, but if it's relevant to the conversation, I'm no longer going to silence those pieces. So, I mean, I could go on and on and on about this, but that is also part of it in the communication sphere is you don't necessarily have to get into litigation. You can quite simply say, I don't share that opinion, but I don't think we need to get into it. Or I don't agree with that stance, but what I'd really love to hear about is how it's going at your job, those new plants you just put in the backyard, fill in the blank.
I found too, with conversations like this, it might be a combination of the emotional aggression, the fact that so often you don't even know what you're arguing about when it comes up. I have an example that is a whole different side. Okay, so I I FaceTimed my mom with my kids, and I was wearing this. I have like 6 of these exact tank tops because I just like them.
Because of course, when you like them, you buy them in every color.
Yeah, and I kind of use them as a bra. I went down the lymph node rabbit hole of like how bad it is to have restriction right under your boobs. And so I'm like, well, what sports bras are too tight. Anyways, these little tank tops are perfect. Well, I get on the phone and I could see her like looking around at something to fix. There's always something to fix. And she's like, you need nipple pasties. And I was like, I'm breastfeeding half the day. I don't want to take off a toxic nipple pasty and wonder if there's remnants in there.
Sure.
And so I'm like, no. And my first thing was free the nipple. The thing is I have like 9 different thoughts. I don't care that my nipples are showing. I don't want nipple pasties. I don't even go outside that much. But those are all coming from a different angle. And so I'm just like, free the nipple, first of all. I don't even see people that often. And she's like, you see people, you go to the grocery store and the post office. And I'm like, God, you miss one word.
Yeah.
And so then I'm like, no, I mean 97% of my day, I am only around our nanny and my husband and my kids. I don't care if my nipples are out. But even if they are, I don't think it's that bad if my nipples are out at the post office. Like if you see my nipples, what, like there's 6 paradigms I'm trying to break with this. And so
Yes.
I pause for a second. I'm like, I don't even know what we're talking about. And
Yeah.
like, where is this going? Why? Is the goal to
Mm.
get me to dress differently by the end of this? And just like taking that step back allowed me to like take off my defenses. And the same things happen in the religious conversations where I'm like, I could come at this from 6 different angles. First of all, do you know how the Bible was made? Second of all, is it really that different? Third of all, is God sending me to hell? Like you really believe in a God that would send somebody like me who has dedicated her life to figuring out how to be the best that I can and help people through it, and you think I'm going to hell? Is that a religion that makes a ton of sense to you? Like, and so
Right.
with anything in these conversations, I interviewed somebody a while back on how to have respectful disagreements, and he said the number one thing is figuring out what you're even talking about. And so
Mm.
often you're coming at it from so many different angles that you just and that's how people argue. And it's like, well, it comes up in politics a lot. Somebody will
Mm.
say something about whatever president that they like, and then it's like, well, at least he's not this. And it's like, that doesn't solve the homelessness issue. Like we're talking about homeless.
Right.
How is talking about how this guy talks or what this guy does going to solve the issue that we're trying to solve?
Right. Or when they say, oh, if you don't like this country, leave. And I'm like, no, 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 that's not the solution. The solution is this doesn't work for me. And we're trying to find the solution. So there's 2 concepts that I want to address around this conversation with your mom that I think could be really enlightening and helpful for people. One is what I like to call the conversation container, meaning the way that how we are enveloped, our tone of voice. If I'm in this space to actually have this conversation with you, if I'm interested in your feedback or your opinions about my nipples, all of that stuff is what I consider the conversation container. So I'm 45 years old. I'm very, very child-free by choice. And I have always been definitive about that since I was a teenager. I was very, very clear that that was not something that I was interested in. However, people wanted to ask me, because I got married when I was 20, they wanted to ask me, oh, you're knocked up. Like, oh, sure. And I'm like, I don't like children. And then they would not know what to do, which was very contrarian of me, but it was fun. So, but so often people feel as though they have the right to make comments or ask questions like, when are you having kids? What if I had been having horrible issues and couldn't get pregnant? It's like, well, thanks for fucking bringing that up. The conversation container is not one of consent. It's not one of I'm on board to have this conversation with you. So one way to address that with her would be to say quite simply, I'm not interested in being in a discussion about my attire today. It's shutting down the entire topic as opposed to litigating about who is right or wrong. Yet, because then what we're talking about is the surface issue versus the root issue. This is another alternative. And you kind of alluded to this a little bit with talking with one of your girlfriends about what is this real anger about? So the surface issue is, should Melissa wear or not wear pasties? That we can fight about all damn day. The root issue for you is there's always something wrong. There's always something my mom needs to nitpick about me. I don't feel seen. I don't feel valuable because there's always something to be fixed, right? And I'm, of course, putting words in your mouth, however you would say it. So you will go so much farther in a conversation if you have the vulnerability and it's safe to be vulnerable and express to her the root issue. So instead of talking, and again, this is, you can pull either tool out depending on where you're at in any given day. So you might say something like, Mom, we could go back and forth about whether or not I should wear pasties or not, but I need to express to you that the way that that sounds, the way that that lands for me is that there's always something wrong. There's always something that I'm not good enough about, something that needs to be nitpicked. And to be quite honest, it just makes me feel unseen. And it doesn't make me really enthused to show up to these calls, right? So now, not every person is safe to be that vulnerable with. Some people will weaponize it. So you have to be clear on, is vulnerability a suitable tool to use with this particular person? What I will say is no matter how contentious the situation or the relationship, most of the time we haven't given vulnerability a try. Most of the time we've just fought for who's right and doubled down on that. So if it is somebody who you do want to continue a relationship with and you would like it to improve in some way, or you have a grievance, like they always nitpick something, it's worth it, I think, to at least try the vulnerability card and talk about the root issue, what's really happening, as opposed to the surface issue. We do it in relationships all the time. So in almost every household, at least in heteronormative terms, maybe in queer terms too, you fight over who loads the dishwasher the right way, the wrong way, right? And you can go to blows about that. When you stand back, and I know this from very personal experience, why am I doubling down on, no, I'm not in a bad mood. You just don't know how to load the dishwasher the right way. When I stand back and look at it, that the surface issue, the presenting issue is the damn dishwasher. The root issue is I'm overwhelmed in my work, or I'm stressed out, or I'm worried about something that's happening with a client and I'm taking it out on you. That could be a potential root issue. It could also be a potential root issue that I don't feel seen or valued for the work I put in domestically, or I feel like a lot of my household labor goes unseen. And so this one small request feels emblematic of not being seen or heard in our relationship. The clincher with all of this is that it is far easier to yell and scream about should I or should not wear pasties than it is to say, hey, listen, here's what happens for me when you say things like that. That's vulnerable. There's risk involved with that. And most of the time we've been hurt or scathed by that person already. So we're already barriered up, armored up. So those are two tactics that you could choose. Either address the conversation container. That's not something I'm interested in discussing today, Mom, but I'd love to hear about. Change the subject. How did it go at your doctor's appointment? Whatever. Or target that root issue as opposed to the surface issue. And that's going to be dependent on that unique relationship and also where you're at. Like if you just had a horrible interaction with a client or your partner or something like that, you might not be in the best space to have a vulnerable conversation with her. Or maybe you know that she just got a bill in the mail that she's freaked out about. She might not be in that space. So it's sort of, all of these things have nuance and I think are important to note in deciding how do I want to address this. What are you thinking over there? I'm super curious.
All of that's awesome. And I love but I would love to hear about that addition, because what I've found is there's been times where I've actually had the wherewithal to shut it down. It's rare though, when that one relationship, for some reason, like I said, the emotional regression, it's like every other relationship, I can sit there and just be silent an extra moment and really think about what I want to say. Whereas for some reason in that one, I'm on my toes, I'm speaking, I'm defending myself before I even realize I didn't even ask to be in a position of defense today. Like this is
That's
not
right.
what phone call was about. And so I love that revert though, because I've used that before without it. And you're so mean. You're so sensitive. And then it's a different conversation. And it's like, I'm just constantly on the defense. Wait, I'm not too sensitive. You did this. I'm not doing that. Like, and it feels like I'm just constantly catching up in it. And so I love that part but I'd love to hear about this because it's taking the power back. And I think in that relationship, and I want to be clear that my mother is also super loving, and
Sure.
I have this really amazing amount of empathy for the fact that, just like you said to your mom, of I acknowledge how difficult it is that all of your children decided to go in a different path.
Yeah.
Another layer to that, what would it be like to fully believe that your children are going to hell? And that sentence creates empathy and anger in me.
Yeah.
But I
Yes.
remember what it felt like at the age of 8 to believe that my grandma was going to hell and feeling like my heart was broken
Mhm.
because that's what I believed. And so random conversations were me trying to say to my grandma, please just do this for me just in case. Like
Right.
on our
Right.
side combos, like, can't you just say this quick prayer just in case you're wrong so that you don't have to be in hell while I'm in heaven? like that. I have the empathy for that. But then it goes to another level of like, and I don't even really want to say this, but then it makes me question intelligence of like, does this
Yes.
make sense? Can we sit with this long enough to really
Yeah.
just collectively agree this doesn't make sense? But yeah, and so that goes to say that with all of it, there's usually so many different things, just like the conversations. How many things am I defending here? How much am I playing catch up? And so what are the ways where I can direct it somewhere I want it? Because if I if I let go of the leash for a second, we're probably going down a path and I'm ending up in an alley I never wanted to be in.
Well, a couple of things here that are coming up for me. Any type of extreme movement, we see this a lot with cults. Nobody, nobody joins a cult. No one. They join a solution. They join a community. They join an answer. They join relief. They join hope. And that is exactly what people do with religion. So we've all had that person in our life who we can see that they are in a cult of one in their relationship, that they are with somebody who's verbally abusive, who's this and that and whatever. No woman signs up, and I will say this because it disproportionately affects women or those who are femme presenting. No one says, I sign up for abusive relationship. Nobody. They sign up for other reasons. And so that for me, I can get on board with because I was there too. I was totally on board. I did subscribe to all of that. And I'm so grateful that I don't any longer, but it's helped me have a bit of compassion and an understanding that the system, it's a systems failure, really. The system is set up to counteract any type of argument that could come your way, to take zero accountability. There's no way to say, oh yeah, we maybe got that wrong. There's always some sort of, well, lean into forgiveness. There's a scapegoat for absolutely everything. So there's a systems failure. But the thing that I wanted to underline too, that you mentioned about how it really gets your goat more than anything else. I think there's such a litany of pain and grief and sorrow that we experience when we deconstruct, that we want to make them pay for that pain. And I don't think we would deliberately say that, like, I want to hurt my parents, but we are just desperately trying to be seen. Like, do you not understand what that did to my sexuality? I was a queer kid growing up and I shut that shit down because I was like, I mean, I'm still a queer, but I shut it down. Thank God I was attracted to men because I was like, I'm not allowed to go down that route. But all my first experiences were with girls. And so I have just an arsenal of anger about what was lost for me because of that dogma. And I found early on, I wanted to make my mom pay. I was angry at her for choosing to do that, even though I knew intellectually, right, logically, I knew that she always did exactly what she thought was the best. She always came from pure intent, and harm was still caused. And I think that's another thing for us to grapple with, regardless of how you were raised, that if there was any type of pain, let's say you had a utopian upbringing, your parents were fantastic, but your mom talked so much shit on her own body, and you saw what was modeled. Maybe you were always the princess, but what was modeled for you was really destructive narrative around disordered eating or around body dysmorphia, et cetera. So you can have both things exist of like, I was enveloped by such sublime love and harm was caused. And there's still stuff that I'm grieving or grappling with. And those things don't have to matter in opposition to one another. They can both stand as their own truths.
That is all such gold. I am reminded of my wedding.
Hmm.
And at my wedding, it's a big deal. I didn't think I was ever going to get married. My husband and I bonded over the fact that we weren't going to get married and have kids. And then we got married like really early on. We're like, let's just get married. Let's do this differently. And now we've got 2 kids and we might have more. Well,
Nice.
when we were getting ready for the wedding, at first we told my mom and she's like, when are you going to do it? I was like, we're thinking this weekend. And then she's like, no, like, let me do a wedding. And so we did a very simple wedding about a month later. And I'm planning it in a way that helps me get my head around marriage. I was so against a wedding that planning these wedding things felt very off to me. So I wanted it to be different. We didn't have cake. We had weed brownies and dessert.
Nice.
I didn't have a normal flower girl. I had my grandma be my flower girl. We had everyone sit in the pool with their feet in and we like built a little platform in the hot tub. So we did things our way. And then I didn't like the idea of my stepdad giving me away or anybody giving me away.
Yeah, fuck that.
But my dad, right before he died, he had this moment, and it's like one of the hardest moments for me to recall. But he was standing there and he like closed his eyes trying to think of how to say this to me. And then he basically said, I give your stepdad my blessing to walk you down the aisle. And so he knew he was dying at that point, and I was still in denial. And
Yeah.
so I was like, there's a number of things stressing me out about this wedding, besides the fact that I had to have a whole paradigm shift to have one. But also I had to figure out how can I honor this really important moment for my dad while also not wanting to give somebody to give me away. And so I had my stepdad officiate the wedding, which was great. During that process, all of these things going through my mind back and forth, I was writing my vows and looking up how to write vows, and ChatGPT didn't exist yet. Man, this was
Yeah.
and so many of the things were religion based. And I realized there was about a week where I was racking my brain, rewriting all of this stuff, having way too long of vows, and because I was writing the whole script for what my stepdad was going to say too. And I had a moment where I realized this isn't about my wedding anymore. This is like a speech to sell my beliefs to someone who's never going to be open to hearing them anyways. And it got me thinking, how many of these conversations, whether I know most people aren't having an argument in their wedding vows, but how often does what we're trying to speak, the truth that we're trying to speak, are we inadvertently trying to sell ourselves where we don't necessarily need to be sold? And where is the line sometimes, and how easy is it to cross differentiating between an ego-driven assertion versus a soul-aligned expression? What truth needs to be spoken versus what truth just needs to be held?
Yeah. Wow. Well, first off, let me just say thank you so much for sharing that. And the situation with your father, what I hear in that anecdote is such extreme amount of love from him. And I think it's an important point to underline that his intent, at least from my vantage point, was not, let me uphold an unbelievably misogynistic and patriarchal tradition that is rooted in women being property. Right? Like, that's not what I'm hearing. I'm hearing, I want to show up for you to be an emblem and a symbol of how much I love you. And so I think it's important for us to recognize intent. I don't think that it's always excusable, right? Like, I don't think it's always something that we're amenable to, but I think we can give it some credence whilst also establishing a boundary. But I think what you're talking about here is over-explaining. I mean, just quite simply over-explaining. It's very akin to if somebody asks you if you're available to hang out, like, hey, can you come over to my house tomorrow night or whatever? And you honestly are like, if I have one more thing to do, I'm going to crack. Like, what I really need to do is go to sleep. And you feel like in order to say no, you now have to say, oh, well, I have Beyonce tickets, or like something massive, right? Or my grandmother's in the hospital. Like, we have to explain all of these vantage points in order to be like, is that good enough for me to decline? Instead of just going, oh, thanks so much for thinking of me. I'm not available. Please invite me again. If you mean that, only if you mean that. But I think the same is happening here for you with your vows of, if no one else was here, if it was just he and I, what would feel important to say? What would feel like it is symbolic of who I am in this union, and symbolic and even literal of who we are in this union? Do we want to call in grandma or anybody else or dad, right? I've had some similar conversations with my partner, because we know that when whoever passes first, we 100% want somebody who is skilled in clairvoyance, clairaudience, clairsentience, somebody who is a medium or available to communicate, has that gift, has curated that gift. That's not going to go well with all of my family. That's okay. I am okay with that. It is way more important to me that he and I have any type of vehicle of communication. Again, from my spiritual standpoint, I'm going to take up spiritual motherfucking space. That is important to me. Now, going back and redoing my wedding on my own terms or things like that, because again, I have a lot of regrets. I got married in the 90s, y'all. I would never have my dad also officiated my wedding, but he walked me down the aisle as well. He gave me away, so to speak, which is not a thing. But I do still have a lot of positive sentiment around that and such an endearing memory. Again, because I know that it wasn't rooted for him in something misogynistic and patriarchal. So I think it's a sliding scale for all of us. For some people, that would not be acceptable. You would never allow that. And that's okay. That is okay too. So I think it's about the removal of the external opinions. If it was just he and I in this hot tub getting married, what would feel important to say? And I think we can also think about that in a bevy of other different scenarios of, okay, if no one was here, what would feel important for me to embody? How do I want to show up? And how can I be congruent with that, even when there are opposing forces around me?
I think that's a question that always comes up now when I'm in a position of potentially needing to speak up. What can I embody? And a lot of times that will remove a lot of what comes up with the first question of like, what do I need to speak up about? Because so often I think that is how we define our truth, by speaking it, by drawing our line in the sand, putting our flag in. Whereas to me, that's sometimes, not always, sometimes it's definitely necessary to speak up, but it's my little over-explainer popping up. It's like, I don't need anyone to accept this. I don't need anyone else to align with this for me to believe it's truth. And I think that's the position I held for too long, is truth is truth. And if there's one person in the room that is actively denying truth, there's like a hole in it. We need to fill it. And so I was constantly trying to fill all the holes. And for a while that served me to really figure out what my holistic view of my existence was. But then it reminds me of something you said in the beginning, where you basically laid your cards down of saying like, you're still exploring certain things, and it like opens the door of, oh, you're not sure. You still have questions. Let me give you this book. And one of my truths is that I always want to leave room to explore. I always want to leave room for deeper questions. I don't think the nature of reality is simplistic enough that we're going to define it in one sentence, or that we even know fully what it is. Any one of us grasps the complexity of what the
Yeah.
true nature of reality is in general. So I feel like I am going to be searching my entire life, and there will still be answers unfolding until the day that I die.
That's
And
right.
that is not to say that I am open to be convinced of anything. I
Yeah.
might be meeting the right person, having the right conversation. Yes, I might leave that conversation convinced of something, but that does not mean that the doors are open for you to insert anything that I'm not asking for or that doesn't
Right.
unfold naturally.
And I think this comes full circle to some of the stuff that we talked about with not having to give a fucking TED talk every time you feel like somebody's wrong. Because here's the deal with truth. Truth is different than fact. Truth is akin to beliefs. Beliefs are malleable. Beliefs are simply a feeling of certainty. So if you believe soulmates exist, you're far more likely to experience that than if you don't, right? Because you are looking for evidence to support that belief. So I think we have to get, because what you might define as truth, someone else will say, no, this is truth, that, women belong in the home, or something asinine like that, right? Like, no, they don't belong in the workforce. That is the truth. That is how we are designed, which is also not true. That, they can go on and on and on about that. So again, I think it comes down to, is this conversation container one in which is safe for me to advocate for my particular truth and also create room for their truth? So one of my favorite stock phrases, and this is something that I would really encourage everybody listening to memorize, literally write it out, stand in front of your mirror and repeat it over and over and over again. It is quite simply, I don't share that opinion. I don't share that opinion. I don't share that opinion, but we certainly don't need to get into it. I don't share that opinion. Like, just having it ready to go. This happened for me years ago, where my little brother, who we are definitely opposite sides of the aisle. And also, could we have way more sides to the aisle instead of just two? Jesus Christ. But we were talking about guns, or he had brought up guns, and I did not want to get into it as we were going out to dinner for a family event. And it was not the time or the place. And he's literally following me, going, trying to, again, fight for the right. This is, I'm going to be right. I'm going to be right. Well, you don't think it goes against Second Amendment, but First Amendment, and I'm going, I told you that I'm not going to engage in this conversation with you any longer. So I'm not fighting about if the legislation is correct or not. I'm not talking about any of my opinions. I'm saying I'm not engaging this conversation container anymore. And he followed me, and I said, I am going to continue walking away from you until you stop talking about this particular topic. It's reinforcing the boundary, not the opinion. It's saying, I'm not doing this conversation, full stop. And they will rope you in. They'll rope you in with, and again, oftentimes it's not malicious. It's just the tools that they know or that they have. They'll say, oh, what? You're too sensitive. You're too this, which my favorite response, by the way, if someone says you're too emotional or too sensitive, say, I really don't appreciate you dismissing my experience. I really don't appreciate you dismissing my experience. If it is a man, a cishet man who says to you, gosh, well, you're just so emotional, or women are so emotional, say, yeah, actually, women are far more emotionally intelligent than men typically. I always have one. I always have a retort. That's my new one. But I think having these phrases on point helps us not go into our old pattern of behavior, because we're creatures of habit, right? So if we're used to people pleasing or shutting up, being quiet, or conversely, fighting and litigating our case, then we will naturally call upon those defenses. They're hardwired well, I guess I shouldn't say hardwired. They're actually quite malleable. If you know much about neurology, like the neuroscience of how the neural pathways work in the brain and how you can actually change those pathways in the brain, essentially that you can teach an old dog new tricks, essentially, that you don't always have to behave that way around your mom, or you don't always have to fly off the handle. You don't always have to people please or turn to perfectionism, but you've got to have some sort of pattern interrupt. You have to go, okay, next time I'm going to say this instead. This is the phrase. And I call this gearing up. If you know that you're going to be in a situation where your brother's going to ask you for money, mom's going to bring up something about church, whatever it is, my best friend's going to pick herself apart about her body. I know that there's these certain things that I can usually count on with this person. Write those out and then write out how you want to respond and actually rehearse it. That's how you will start to ingrain that so that you're not just this deer in a headlight and go back into your old patterns of behavior, but rather can start saying and doing things differently. And it's clumsy and clunky as fuck in the beginning, just like anything else, right? Can you imagine? I remember when I learned how to ride a bike, I was 7 years old. I was at my friend Molly Jensen's house, and she had this really great two-wheeler bike, but then it had training wheels that weren't quite level with the ground. So it would save you if you tilted slightly. But I remember thinking, there's no way I'm ever going to learn this. There's no way that this is going to be natural. I would watch people ride their bike and be like, how the hell am I ever going to do that? It's clunky at first, but in order for it to become an embedded part of the subconscious mind, it has to be repeated. And we have to repeat that with our self-talk. We have to repeat it with our behavior. And I know you're huge on this, don't just consume these concepts. You actually have to do something different. I oftentimes will use the parallel of reading every book on Pilates or listening to every podcast about how to hold your core. Nothing's going to strengthen your center unless you actually hit the mat. That's not all that education, all of that acumen will do you jack shit. You actually have to hit the mat. So the same is true for this. You cannot just keep leaning on, my mom is so frustrating, and not do a goddamn thing about it. You have to actually take pen to paper and say, this is what I'm going to say the next time my brother asks me for money, my mom brings up religion, fill in the blank, and rehearse it. And give yourself the freedom to be sort of that little 7-year-old trying to figure out how to ride a bike.
I love that. And I completely agree. I love the idea of having what you're going to say, having some default sentences. I did this when I was learning how to say no. There was actually an online generator on how to say no that I found.
Nice.
This was like 2016 or 17 or something like that. And I was like, this is the best. And I was writing them down and I was using them with my boss. And it really helped because it didn't feel natural to me.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of what we grow into is not going to feel natural to the version of us that we are trying to grow out of. And so that's a line that I feel like people sometimes get hazy when in this endless search in the spiritual communities of finding your authentic self. That authentic self is not a shy, unconfident, blah, blah, blah. That's just the suit that you're wearing right now.
That's right.
The authentic self that you get to should always be a powerful creator that is creating his or her reality. That is your authentic self. Everything else is the outfit that you're wearing. And you get to choose what you lean into. And with the religion that we keep going back to, but it really fits with almost anything. Is it the political divide? Is it the way you two view relationships? Oftentimes, both realities can be true. And I found that the more I evolve, I am evolving into somebody who can create space for a complete alternative view existing and just sort of viewing the wonder of it, viewing it as the spectrum of all that is possible. If I really believe what I do about the nature of the universe, then every reality, every possibility has a place to be true for somebody. Mm-hmm. It reminds me of the Bhagavad Gita talks about whenever there's a decline in righteousness or an increase in unrighteousness, at that time I will manifest myself on earth. And I truly believe that's where most religions have come from. Whatever the avatar is that's come there to embody a different form of truth, reality, provide hope, we all jump to create a religion around that, not seeing the big picture of like, no, look at what's possible if you disidentify with ego to this level, if you identify with a realm that's not just this materialistic illusion that's in front of us seeming so real. And so one thing I want to leave people with is it's a practice that I have been attempting to embody, make a habit. I noticed that Ram Dass
Hmm.
almost always responds to anything at first with, oh, wow. And what I love
Yeah.
about this is so often our first instinct is a form of resistance or clinging, really depending on what experience you're having. But oh wow, leaves room for the awe, for the difference. It You can completely disagree with somebody and say, "Oh wow." And instead of just shutting them down, it's leaving room for the possibility that somebody else is living a truth that is the exact opposite of what you want to embody, and it's still okay most of the time.
That's right. Well, and that's also an amazing self-talk hack. So when you hear yourself say that's not possible for you, or you're so disgusting, or God, you're such a fucking idiot, respond to yourself with, oh, wow, right? It's a disruptor to the vortex. We've all gone through that. So it doesn't matter if we're talking to somebody else or if we're talking to ourselves. Just going, there was a thought. Oh shit, that wasn't helpful. Ooh, where did that come from? Right? It doesn't always have to be a direct refutation or some sort of overtly flowery positive. Oh no, I am enough. Sometimes it just has to go, oh, I'm not going down that road. Distract myself, right? It's the same set of tools. Just feels a little bit more awkward because you're knocking it around in your own brain. But
Well,
something that I wanted to mention too with all of this stuff is, how the hell would we know? How the hell would we know what to say if we didn't Google it, if we didn't listen to some podcast? Like none of us are, and thank God this is starting to change a little bit now with like Alpha and Gen Z. But if you are a millennial or older, it's likely that you were raised with parents where you had to shapeshift in some way, or you're making up for something in some way. So I think, how on earth would we know what verbiage to use to speak up for ourselves in our work world, or tell somebody we don't want to date anymore, that we want to divorce? Like, where would we get that information? Our parents? Fuck no. Media? Absolutely not. That leaves trial and error, basically. So please be gentle with yourselves if you're listening and going, oh, wow, I can't imagine getting to that point. I would have said that same thing. And it's commitment and study toward who you want to be. It's going all in on you instead of everyone else. And that is already a massive paradigm shift, because disproportionately, as women, we are conditioned to caretake for everybody else. A majority of our toys, again, this is changing, but many of us grew up with caretaker toys, how to cook, how to take care for babies. That is wildly inappropriate, in my opinion, to put on a child. Here, caretake for an entire human. Give me a science kit, please. Give me the NASA kit. Teach me how to work a dump truck, because that seems way more innocuous than take care of an entire human. I obviously I have issues with that, but again, this is a systems failure. We're set up to think that we have to caretake for everyone else's emotion, that we have to twist and contort in order to be accepted. So please recognize that going all in on yourself, the cards are already stacked against you. So be gentle. This is not for the faint of heart. It's a challenge, right? But my God, the reward is worth it.
well, I love leaving listeners with a grounded peace of mind, love, something to focus on this week. We've already given them so much, including actual phrases to say. Would you add anything to the focus for the week to make all of this real?
Well, something that you brought up a little bit earlier was just like, where do I need boundaries, or how do I know when to speak up? And I think one of the things that we can look at is how invested we are in the reception from other people. So I use the phrase constantly, you are responsible for your intention, not your reception. And your intention is who you are being, what you were saying earlier. How am I showing up? Who am I? How am I embodying myself? If somebody were to see me on a stage or on a screen, how would they describe that character? Those are the things that we go, this is my intention. This is who I want to be. I want to describe my character this way. Our reception is the litany of ways that we can be received. Some people are going to be totally aligned with you and be like, hell yeah, that's amazing. Some people are going to be indifferent. They're not even going to clock you. You're not even going to be on their radar. And then others still will be acrimonious and hateful towards you, think that you are not who you should be or not behaving the way you should be. Your nipples should be covered. And it's up to you in those moments to go, okay, am I at peace with how I showed up? Because I'm responsible for my intention, not my reception.
Well, thank you so much I just loved this conversation. So lively, so many actionable things grounded in real examples. So for listeners that want to learn more about you, where is the best place for them to connect?
So my corner of the internet is over at amygreensmith.com. And all of those names are spelled the basic bitch way. Nothing fun, nothing exciting. Amy Green Smith. Not even an extra E on the end of green. But quite easy to navigate. And you'll find a bunch of different freebies over there. I have a free workbook you can get your hands on that has 9 actionable challenges to help you start speaking up. And a lot of the things that we've talked about today will be covered in very tangible, actionable challenges. There's a free hypnosis around anxiety and fear, if that's something that you struggle with. So lots of goodies. And then like any self-respecting Gen Xer, I hang out the most on Instagram. You can find me under that handle, Hey Amy Green Smith. And that's kind of my handle all across social. But I hang out the most on Insta. So yeah, come get some freebies, hang out, see if it resonates with you. And then there are always steps to take it deeper if you're interested.
All the links for this episode will be at mindlove.com/357. Your challenge for this week is to think about your intention. We're so focused on how we're being received. But when we focus on that, then we're putting all of our actions through the lens of somebody else. Because nobody receives actions, thoughts, conversation with total purity. We are all constantly filtering everything that we hear, see, feel through the lens of our own experiences, through our past, whether it's traumas, whether it's joys. And so if you are acting based on how you are hoping somebody receives you versus your intention, then it's kind of like pouring water into a muddy cup. You can never quite control that outcome. When you focus on your intention, that allows you to start from the source of purity, to start before it gets muddled through the perception of somebody else. And it allows you to choose versus trying to fit in. So let me know how that goes. Reach out to me on Instagram at mindlovemelissa. I also have a question for you. You know that feeling when you're on the edge of something big? When you can sense that there's this incredible version of yourself just waiting to emerge, but somehow life keeps getting in the way? You're busy, you're tired, and that big vision just stays a little bit out of reach. Well, that's where soul strength activation comes in. This is not your typical coaching program. It's a transformative journey designed for seekers like you who are ready to stop playing small and start living their biggest, boldest vision. In soul strength activation, we get crystal clear on who you truly are and what you're here to do. And then we tackle all of those sneaky self-sabotaging thoughts, align your daily actions with your dreams, and guide you towards bringing your vision to life. Our next cohort kicks off August 28th, and doors officially open on July 28th. Spots are limited and they fill up fast. So if you want to be first in line, go to mindlove.com/waitlist and sign up now. Joining the waitlist gives you exclusive updates, early access, and potentially a special offer when enrollment opens. So don't let another day slip by wondering what if. Take the first steps towards your extraordinary life that you're meant to live at mindlove.com/waitlist. And that is all for today. So thanks for giving your mind a little love today, and I'll see you next week.
Thanks for tuning into Your Higher Frequency with Mind Love. Head to mindlove.com for a free gift to keep your vibes up until next week.